HSPs. You know what I'm talking about? HSPs, as some of us identify here. Am I on? HSPs, highly sensitive people. It's very in vogue these days to acknowledge and talk about highly sensitive people, HSPs. And my understanding, there we go, thank you. About 20% of the population, the studies, the folks who've been studying this for quite a while now, were high HSPs, highly sensitive people. I have a theory that that we may even be more concentrated at churches. We may have a higher concentration of HSPs than the general population. I don't know, we'll see. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to do something really weird. We did this once on Zoom, but today I was feeling brave enough to try it with you in person. This is what Resmaa Menakem, that brilliant scholar of trauma and generational trauma, invites. He recommends pastors, you should start your service with this. He says, get everybody to tap their bellies. And this is why we're doing it. We're going to be doing some vagal toning. So, as you're willing to do something really weird, and you can use both hands, actually, yeah. And you can even give a little, to your abdomen as the, much pressure as is comfortable for you, and then we're going to hum together. Oh, yeah. Oh, keep going. Okay. Oh, take a deep breath and let it out with a sigh. The theory is the polyvagal theory. You've probably heard this talked about. It's getting very in vogue. That our vagus nerve, this enormous nerve that goes all the way up from our brainstem down into our abdomen, and is responsible for activating our parasympathetic nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the system that helps us to rest and digest, to release stress, to come back to our wiser and more spacious selves. That when we are feeling that tightness in our belly, it is literally the cramping and restricting our vagus nerve. And that exercises like this, vagal toning, can help us to ground and come back to that deeper self. TikTok. Does anybody TikTok? I don't do TikTok. No, I wouldn't imagine this crowd. Oh, good, Jim. Good for you. All right, Jim is going to be our TikTok coach, everyone. So if you want to learn TikTok, if we wanted, you want to get the families here. No, we're not using it either, are we? So if you go on there, any of those things, you'll find people have all sorts of exercises now to do. You can get all sorts of training in vagal toning. And what I understand from the research is actually the thing that is most effective, or one of the most effective at least, for vagal toning is what we just did and what we actually do every week, just singing together. Singing with a group of people. Because it's through our connectedness, through our relationship, but not just talking, doing something that actually grounds us. This is why so many spiritual practices are about doing something grounding in a group. So I have a theory, not only that we might be a little higher proportion of HSPs at church, but that in fact, everyone's got a sensitive nervous system. And those of us who manage to fake it have just learned how to keep some distance there. I'm sure there is a wide variety. In fact, I think because I think that's what it means to be on a human spectrum, right? This human spectrum here of sensitivity. Richard Powers has a great line about this, and he's the author of The Overstory, and his book after that, Bewilderment, he imagines this empathy machine. And he has a grieving family, a father and his son who are grieving the mom who has died. And the son has atypical neurology, or however we say it. And at one point, the son, who's learning empathy with this empathy machine, learning to match his own inner neuronal state with the neuronal state that's being fed back to him by the fMRI machine, the dad talks to a pediatrician, and the pediatrician makes the suggestion that perhaps your son is on the spectrum. And it brought me to tears reading it, actually. Richard Powers says the father thinks, I wanted to tell the man that everyone alive on this fluke little planet was on the spectrum. That's what a spectrum is. Yeah, so accepting ourselves, every part of us, wherever we are, on whatever spectrum we're thinking about. Been reading a book by Susan Cain. It's published about a decade ago called Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. She offers, as part of the conclusion, a quote from Anais Nin, which I think sums up her mission with the book. She says, "Our culture made a virtue of living only as extroverts." And she tells a beautiful cultural history in the book of how American culture went from a culture of character to a culture of personality. And then points out this personality that is highly valuing of extroversion. So our culture made a virtue of living only as extroverts, and Anais Nin said, we discouraged the inner journey, the quest for a center. So we lost our center and have to find it again. The early research that has become this body of research talking about highly sensitive people and so on was showing in infants the different levels of reactivity to a surprising stimulus, something new being introduced. And what it found was that 60% of infants are able to react. They react to a surprising new stimulus in their environment, strange stimulus, react appropriate, and then settle. 20% react and are not able to settle. This is that 20% highly sensitive people. And then 20% don't react. This is in the other direction, right? So you might notice, you might check in and notice what you know about yourself and what you know about those you love, of where you might fit on this spectrum of human experience. One of the ways that people train then, and we all do this, to deal with our sensitivities, is that the amygdala, which is what's happening in those infants, the amygdala, the part of our brain that is responsible for emotional reaction. It's the mammalian, the ancient mammalian brain that interprets the experience we're having and lets us know whether it's a threat or not. What we all learn to do is regulate our amygdala response with our prefrontal cortex. Right, so if the mammalian brain's back here, and this is Daniel Siegel's way of talking about this, the amygdala is this deep part of the brain back here, this mammalian part, and then out here in the prefrontal cortex, we can talk to ourselves and let ourselves know that that thing that was feeling so scary isn't really a threat at all. And the studies that fascinated me that Susan Cain talks about are the fMRIs they've done when observing people doing this, is that the level of activity that they monitor in the prefrontal cortex exactly mirrors the level of activity in the amygdala. So when people are talking themselves out of being afraid, the prefrontal cortex will increase its activity to the same degree as the amygdala decreases its activity. So we have this incredible superpower, this amazing thing that is different, makes us different from any other animals, that we're able to talk to ourselves and regulate the deepest structures of our brains. Again, I think this is what religious community is about developing this capacity. In the second letter to the Corinthians, when the early Christians, these early Christian communities, they're wrestling with how to know if they're doing it right, how to know if their way of being religious together is appropriate, is following the path that Jesus has taught, that God is calling them to. They wonder if we've thrown out the paradigm of Mosaic law, of following the laws of the era of Moses as knowing that that's how to be good, that's how to be a good religious community. If you've thrown that out, how will we know if we're living rightly? How will we know if we're living holy lives? And all of us, they write, with unveiled faces, seeing the glory of the Lord as though reflected in a mirror, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. For this comes from the Lord, the Spirit. With unveiled faces, seeing the glory of the Lord as though reflected in a mirror, we will know the goodness of our path. We'll know the holiness of our lives because the Spirit of life, God, will be reflected in our unveiled face. When I was in high school, I used to look in the bathroom mirror, and all I could see was the body of a monster. It was the Beauty and the Beast, that cartoon version, it was like the Beast. That was what I saw in the bathroom mirror. And I would anguish. I didn't know how to use that prefrontal cortex to settle without someone in relationship to me beyond the mirror. And that self-critic, that part is still in me. But I have learned, as most of us learn, to distinguish that voice from my authentic self, from my adult self, from my soul. That adult self, you know what part I'm talking about? That part of you, that essential part of you that is like the sun when the clouds part, when it comes into clear focus. That feels like the clarity of a mirror that has just been cleaned. And you see suddenly in sharp relief what you actually look like. This is what Buddhists talk about as Buddha nature, what our William Ellery Channing talked about as likeness to God. It's the Imago Dei theology, this inheritance of our Judeo-Christian history, which tells us we are all made in the image of the holy. That exactly who we are and how we are is beautiful, just as we are. The contemporary psychologist Richard Schwartz talks about this in his model of internal family systems. He likes to map and diagram all the different parts of ourselves. And one of his books about that is called No Bad Parts. No bad parts. Every part, every voice, even the harshest ones, are there to serve a purpose. No part, however twisted and traumatized, is beyond love, is beyond healing or beyond hope. And if our core self, our adult self, our Buddha nature can hold and speak to those hurt and broken pieces, we can live in the kingdom of God here on earth. We can embrace ourselves as whole and holy now. I think this is the essence of universalism, of our heritage, that says not only is no person forsaken, not only is there no hell to cast a person into, there is no part of us, no piece of us that can be cast out. In Rilke's Sonnets of Orpheus, he wrestles with that story of Narcissus, among other ancient myths. And one of the poems is a poem that he writes to the mirrors themselves. It says, this is Don Patterson's translation, "Mirrors, no one's had the skill to speak about your secret lives. Doors cut into time, you're filled with nothing but the holes of sieves." And then he imagines in this poem all the beauty of the world trapped in mirrors until Narcissus comes. And through his loving gaze, awakens these mirrors, brings them alive. It's a beautiful recasting of Narcissus, this awakener of the beauty that is there. Mirrors were also a holy symbol in an Exodus story. They were used to help create the basins to wash at the entrance to the temple. And the question of where did these mirrors come from was one that was tossed to the midrash, right? To the series of Jewish rabbis speaking to one another over the centuries about where did these mirrors come from if they were going to bring mirrors to build the basins. And I just love this. One midrash from the 8th to 9th century put it like this: the women, who we know in the Exodus story are told the women are the ones who bring the mirrors to build the basins. The women would go down to draw water from the river. Whereupon the Blessed Holy One prepared small fishes for them inside their jars. And they would cook some and sell some and buy wine with the proceeds and go out into the field and feed their husbands there. And this is an important moment because this is during the time of slavery in Egypt. This is under the rule of the Pharaoh. And one of the laws was separation between men and women. They weren't allowed to be in one another's presence because Pharaoh, the Egyptian empire, did not want them to procreate. Did not want them to have family lives. So after they had eaten, they took out their mirrors and looked into them together with their husbands. And she would say, "I am more beautiful than you." And he would say, "I am more beautiful than you." And as a result, they would arouse them to sexual desire. That's the Midrash, where the mirrors for the temple came from. Looking at a mirror and declaring how beautiful you are. An aphrodisiac, a defiance of Pharaoh, an act of self-love and liberation all at once. Do it by yourself, do it with a partner, do it with several partners, whatever your jam is, as long as it's consensual, wherever you lie on that wild and boundless spectrum of human sexuality, whatever allows you to reinforce to your nervous system that you are an accurate and holy reflection of God, of the Spirit of life. May it be so, and amen.